32 teams in 32 days. This is episode number 20, the Indianapolis Colts episode. Let's welcome in Jim Ayello, Colts reporter for the Indy Star and fellow Missouri Tiger. Jim, what's going on?
Not much. How you doing?
I'm doing great. So we are in the just a quarterback away era, right? Maybe it started with the Colts and Andrew Luck. Maybe the Colts were the first team to truly be a quarterback away. But, people think the 49ers are a quarterback away, even though they just made a Super Bowl. Washington is a heavy pick team in that category as well. And then, of course, there's Indianapolis, have had one of the league's premier rosters for a couple of years, and they got their quarterback. Carson Wentz trying to get the spark he once had. And how important was this for Indianapolis, and what were your thoughts when it happened?
It's huge for Indianapolis because, as you mentioned, that name that is taboo around here a little bit, Andrew Luck. It's gotten to the point around here where I feel like he's remembered kind of like Peyton Manning almost in a way, because it's like that unlocked that potential that never came to be fully. And so anyway, it's an interesting thing. But anyway, he left, he retired, and that put the Colts and Chris Ballard in a big hole because they thought they were building this roster around him. They were going to be a Super Bowl contender because of him. And then he walks away, and they had to fill in with Jacoby Brissett, and then they had to get Phillip Rivers for a year. And then they finally get this guy, Carson Wentz, who Frank Reich believes fully in like 100% is the quarterback that can be a franchise guy, who was the MVP candidate that he was in Philadelphia. All those things. They believe he can be those things. And so they went out, they make the trade with the Eagles, they get Carson Wentz, and now they think that they thought last year they had a Super Bowl contender. And again, you could argue, they lost in the wild card round. But they also pushed the Bills to the brink, 27-24. They played really well in that game. A few things didn't go their way. They could actually pull out that game. So are they Super Bowl contenders? Maybe. We got to see what Carson Wentz shows up, but that's what they think they got. So they're very excited about getting Carson Wentz, and they're very excited for the price they got him at. I mean, they didn't overpay. And if he ends up being the guy, that did that conditional pick thing. So if he ends up being the quarterback they think he's going to be, they're happy to give up the first round pick. If he's not the quarterback they think he's going to be, second round pick next year is not that big a deal combined with the third round pick this year. So it puts them in position, I think, to see what kind of team they have and let Carson Wentz kind of see what kind of quarterback he can be here in Indianapolis. And I forgot the second part of your question already because I got rolling on Carson.
Oh, it was just, when were your thoughts when it happened?
Oh, my thoughts were, you know what? It almost felt inevitable. It's weird. Like last year, we kind of learned our lesson last year. Everybody's like, hey, Phillip Rivers to the Colts, Phillip Rivers to the Colts, Phillip Rivers to the Colts. And we're like, yeah, maybe that makes some sense. Obviously, see all the connections with Frank Reich and all that. And they kind of need a quarterback now. But, you start getting creative and you start going, maybe they'll trade up. Maybe they'll trade for this guy. Maybe they'll do all this stuff. Nope, it was Phillip Rivers. That was what they wanted, that they got their guy. And so when the Carson Wentz rumor started popping up this time around, I think a lot of us on the beat were like, okay, let's believe this. Like, let's like, we'll dig into Carson Wentz because this makes too much sense. And then, of course, it happens. Now, there were some other teams that came in. The Chicago Bears, I think, were interested in Carson Wentz. But ultimately, you knew that behind the scenes, Carson Wentz was kind of driving this a little bit, pushing it toward Indianapolis. He wanted to play with Frank Reich again. And I think he kind of always thought it was going to get done. It's just a matter if the Eagles were going to settle for the price that Chris Ballard was willing to pay. And ultimately, it happened. So I thought the fit was good. Again, I watched a lot of Carson Wentz last year. It wasn't pretty. So from that standpoint, I'm going, well, maybe it's not maybe a good fit for Indianapolis. But I've also watched a lot of Frank Reich, and over the past few years, man, like it's hard not to believe him as one of the like true quarterback whisperers in the NFL. Like he has gotten the very best out of Andrew. I thought Andrew Luck's one of his best seasons was with him. Carson Wentz had an MVP season with him. Nick Foles took him to the Super Bowl with Frank Reich there. Jacoby Brissett played really well in the first 8 games before he got hurt with Frank Reich. And then even Phillip Rivers last year, people thought he was toast at 38 years old and had a really good year for the Colts. So I think if anybody can get the best out of Carson Wentz, it's Frank Reich. So I think the match makes a lot of sense. Now we'll just have to see if it works.
And I'm one of the biggest Carson Wentz supporters out there, and a lot of people think this move was to rekindle the relationship with Frank Reich, but more importantly, relight that spark from 2017. My thought process can be simplified as like this. He was really good in 2019. What if the Colts look at last year, just give it a watch and say, this guy was better than what we had last year. We think he's a top 12, top 10 guy because that's what he was 2 years ago.
It's possible. And like you said, I think a lot of people have said exactly what you said was like, hey, maybe 2017 isn't attainable. Like maybe let's just say it isn't. Like say he can't get back to MVP guy. That's okay. Like 2019 guy down the stretch, particularly in December when I think they went 4-0 and it was like a 10-1 touchdown interception ratio. He was really good for an Eagles team that didn't have a lot of weapons. Their offensive line was really banged up. And he kind of just willed them to the playoffs. I think Frank Reich saw that 2019 tape and said, yeah, that's still my guy. And 2020, like we're starting to we're starting to read now. There was a really good story in The Athletic about kind of the dysfunction within Philadelphia coaching staff and the front office. Again, maybe there was more at play here, kind of taking down Carson Wentz than just Carson Wentz. Maybe it was, we all know that the weapons were not great. We all know the offensive line, which got some great players, were super banged up last year and just couldn't get in front of him. And we know that the Jalen Hurts thing had its own little effect. That was a weird kind of a pick. And kind of it seemed to mess with Carson Wentz's mentality a little bit. This seems like a really fresh, clean start. And I'm with you. I think if he gets back to just 2019 Carson Wentz and plays to the level, I mean, if he plays to the level that Phillip Rivers played last year, which again was really good and a lot better than people think, if he just is that good, this Colts team could be a contender.
I believe Phillip Rivers, his passing was like 98. It was almost 100, and it was one of his better seasons, and it was quiet because he had that game. Who was it against? It was terrible.
Browns.
The Browns game, yeah. It was like, and then there were games where he played really, really well, and the Colts really good. They started off well, and it was like, not a bad year for the Colts. I thought that they were going to take the division, but Tennessee played well down the stretch. But free agency, Colts have plenty of cap space once again. They didn't make a splash signing for the second year. I mean, you can argue Rivers and Buckner sort of last year, but they kept a lot of their guys. Danico Autry, not one of them. Was that surprising at all to you?
Yeah, they wanted Danico Autry back. He's a guy that's versatile for them. They like that he can play the edge and get some rush. They also love that he can play the 3 technique, which is possibly the most important position on their defense, is a guy who's like an interior disruptor. That's why they traded for DeForest Buckner to do it. They like that, hey, if Buckner was out, we can plug Autry right in. We know he's really good there. The price was high. I mean, it was not super high. It was about $7 million a year for 3 years is what he ends up getting. But they were in, and then they were out, and then it was okay. Maybe if that's the price, let's try to work something out to keep him in Indianapolis. But by the time kind of things went down the road, Tennessee was willing to commit a little bit more money to him, guaranteed in the first 2 years than the Colts were, and so he leaves, and that does leave a hole on the defensive line, no doubt. Now, Taekwon Lewis had kind of a nice year 3 last year. If you kind of extrapolate his stats that he had in limited playing time last year over a full season, he is kind of a Danico Autry fill-in, like just kind of can give you some of the same stuff. Unfortunately, they don't have a replacement ready for Justin Houston, who, again, is still out in the free agent market, so they could maybe bring him back. They just don't have a lot of rush right now. And I think in free agency, kind of getting to your point, was they didn't make any big splash signings. I think there was the expectation that they would add more quality depth than they have. They signed Isaac Rochelle on defensive line. They brought back Al-Qadim Muhammad on defensive end. But I think there was a lot of quality edge rushers on the free agent market. And I think people were expecting, well, maybe if they add 1 or 2 of these guys, and they still can. I mean, they're still they're still talking about Clowney. They're still in on Justin Houston. Ryan Kerrigan is still out there. Like there are some guys they could go get and make this pass rush a little bit more formidable. And then the offensive line, we thought maybe they would get an offensive tackle to fill in for, Anthony Costanzo, who had retired. Maybe a guy like Kelvin Beachum or Villanueva from Pittsburgh, a guy you could plug in and start, and then if you drafted somebody, great. Now you have some really good depth. Now they did sign some depth pieces: Sam Tebby, Julian Davenport, guys with starting experience, so they can do those things. But I think a lot of people thought, hey, giant amount of cap space, go sign some 1 or 2 year deals, commit a bunch of money up front, and load up the roster for a run this year. Not what Chris Ballard wanted to do. That ultimately, the Colts like to keep their flexibility. They got some big long-term extensions coming for some of their best players. And I think they said, we have those extensions, we're going to get those done, but let's maintain that cap flexibility going into the future. And it's disappointing for Colts fans because I think they want to see those big moves in the offseason and feel really good about things. But ultimately, they're running it back. Like they're bringing back a lot of the same guys from 2020. And there's a reason to feel good about that. That was an 11-5 team. Like I said, they pushed the Bills to the brink. If some of the younger guys take a step forward, there's no reason to think they can't be contenders in the AFC.
Right. And that's a great point. Run it back. And it was weird because after day 1, the Colts were quiet. Like they were one of the teams who were really, really quiet. One of those teams with a lot of cap space that just didn't do anything. And everyone was like, why is Chris Ballard not doing anything? And I'm sitting here like, Chris Ballard never does anything on day 1. Why are we surprised? Right. But, they took it slow, kept a lot of their guys. They kept Xavier Rhodes around, and he was amazing in 2020 after being brought over after a horrendous 2019 in Minnesota, and that ended his tenure there. How crucial was making that happen?
It was just a really smart move, and they got him for a pretty cheap price. So I was kind of surprised they got him for as cheap as they did. I think the veteran cornerback market didn't play out quite the way I think even a guy like Xavier Rhodes had hoped, just because he did have a really great year. I thought his numbers, if you look at his numbers in coverage, some of the more like advanced analytics stuff said he was as good as some Pro Bowlers last year. And again, he was playing more zone than he had been. And I think those guys they don't maybe get paid as well as some of the guys who play more man-to-man. But again, he had a great year. They bring him back cheap. He's a guy that worked really well with Rock Ya-Sin, who's a corner the Colts still believe in. High pick a couple of years ago. They still think he can be a starter. And they watched a lot of film together. They worked together a lot. I think a second year together could really help Rock develop into the corner they think he can be. And that's crucial because they don't have a lot of corner depth right now. But with the bringing back Xavier and having Rock and then having Kenny Moore in the slot, who's one of the best slot corners in the NFL, they do have a really good secondary, again, with Kari Willis and Julian Blackman behind them. It's young, it's growing together, but they have a couple of veteran presences there, Kenny being kind of in between, but then Xavier Rhodes being the guy that kind of can mentor them. I thought that was really huge for their defense. And they're going to be even more critical now because right now, we talked about the edge rush. If they're not going to get a lot of edge rush, they're going to need those guys to cover for a little bit longer. And so bringing back Xavier Rhodes and Rock and having Kenny, like they have guys that can cover and cover a lot of ground, especially with the linebackers too, Darius Leonard, Bobby Okereke, really good in zone coverage. They can be a good defense that can get by without as much edge pressure as some other teams.
So they also brought back Marlon Mack, and it's huge because bringing back your guys when you're like 11-5, 10-6 playoff team on the cusp of becoming more than that, you can either re-sign all your guys or bring in more guys and hope that they're upgrades. The Colts went the former and they kept their guys. They brought back Marlon Mack, expecting a full recovery from the torn ACL he suffered early in the year. Similar to the Lions bringing in Jamal Williams, even though Marlon Mack was in-house. Why did they do this? And is this more because of a doubt in Jonathan Taylor, or is it to help him?
It's to help him. And honestly, it was kind of good for Marlon Mack. I think Marlon Mack coming off that Achilles injury was like running backs with Achilles injuries. You never really know what's going to like it kind of like ruined Arian Foster's career. There was another guy, I can't remember, name's not coming to me, but another guy who had an Achilles injury. And it's tough on running backs because you need that as much agility to play that position as you do anything else. But they think he can recover. And I think he wanted to show teams that, hey, I can be the same running back I was a couple of years ago, the guy that ran for 1,000 yards and was one of the better running backs in the AFC. So they give him a chance at a reunion in an offense he's very familiar with, an offensive line he's very familiar with, and it's a good chance to succeed. And again, gets him back to the market next year to get paid. Meanwhile, he gives them really great depth behind Jonathan Taylor. They have full confidence in Jonathan Taylor, as well they should. I mean, I think everybody that watched in the last 6-7 games last year knows just how good a running back he can be. But again, like what happened with Mack was last year was he was supposed to be the starter. He went down week 1. They had Taylor, and that worked out great. Now, if the opposite happens, if Taylor is the starter week 1 and he gets hurt early in the year, now they have Marlon Mack. It's good depth for them. It's good for Marlon Mack because, again, it puts him in a situation he's comfortable in to try to prove himself. But no, this is, again, for the fantasy owners out there, this is Jonathan Taylor's show. Like, this is his show. He's gonna catch a lot of passes. He's gonna run the ball 15, 20 times a game. Like, he's gonna be the workhorse in this backfield. Again, Mack will get his, Nyheim Hines will get his, Wilkins will get mixed in the mix a little bit. But with Mack returned, they have one of the best and deepest running back crews in the NFL.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned fantasy because when I had Dave Burkett on for the Lions, I asked him about bringing in Jamal Williams, and he was like, well, fantasy owners for DeAndre Swift aren't they shouldn't be worried. It's still Swift's show. And I was like, that wasn't really a fantasy question, but it's funny that you guys bring it up because, committees happen all the time. It happens. And I agree with you. I'm not going to say it's a committee like they were planning on having it last year. Obviously, it didn't turn out that way.
Right.
Thankfully for Jonathan Taylor fantasy owners, because someone got them in him in the 9th or 10th round, thinking he'd be a backup for 11, 12 weeks. And by the time playoffs come around, he's the full starter. And what he did the last couple of weeks of the season were he was the Jaguars game, 220 and 2 touchdowns. Oh my goodness. I know he's a stud, and he's one of the amazing weapons that Carson Wentz has. And there's probably going to be more added in the 12 to 13 days when the draft rolls around. But T.Y. Hilton comes back when it wasn't looking likely that he was going to. $10 million for a 1-year contract. Do they expect him to still be a 100 target guy? Because he wasn't in 2019, was very close to that in 2020 after having reaching that mark in the previous 6 years of his career.
100 targets that's an interesting question. I think that's probably right where he's going to be around. Now, I think if you ask Frank Reich, he's going to expect Michael Pittman to really take a step forward in production and targets. Like, they're going to use him, I think, a lot more this year. You saw kind of early in the year, and then he went down with an injury. And then when he came back, the game against Tennessee. He's really, I don't think I gave him enough credit when they drafted him for how great he is with the ball in his hands after the catch. Like, he is so tough to bring down. He builds up a head of speed, and he just doesn't like being tackled, which not true of a lot of wide receivers. Actually, it's not true. You can't say that about T.Y. Hilton. And again, that's not supposed to be an insult. T.Y. Hilton is amazing at not getting hit. Like, he is incredible at avoiding contact, which is great for extending his career and staying on the field. That's why he stayed so healthy for the first 8 years of his career. He's amazing at it. But Pittman's not going to play that way. Pittman's going to try to run you over. Pittman's going to try to pick up the extra yards. And you like having kind of guys like that, both kind of guys on your team like that. But they expect Pittman to take a big step forward and be a lot more involved in this offense. We'll have to see what they do at tight end. They still have Jack Doyle, still have Melly Cox. We have to see if they kind of want a pass catching tight end still. I think Zach Ertz is still in the mix if that trade is, if the Eagles and the Colts can ever agree on a trade or what's going on there. But I think the Colts are still interested there. They obviously could still draft somebody, a kind of a young move tight end. But as currently, the roster as is now, yeah, I see T.Y. Hilton at 100 targets or close to it. Again, it kind of depends on Paris Campbell's health. I know that's kind of been a struggle for him the last couple of years, but T.Y. Hilton is a guy that knows how to get open. He's not like the burner deep threat that he was earlier in his career, but he's great in intermediate. He can still get deep, and he did last year a couple of times, but he's great intermediately. He's great. He's more of a technician of a route runner than I think people expect him to be. Maybe it's just because that wasn't his reputation earlier in his career, but he's still really good. Yeah, I could see him 60 catches with 90, 95 targets, if that makes sense, something like that.
That's pretty much where he was last year. He missed a game. I think he had 94, 95 targets, something like that.
There you go.
He was right around there, but we'll see what happens with Paris Campbell because he obviously missed all of last year. But let's talk about the draft. So 21st, 54, 127, 165 is the Colts picks. Obviously, no third-round pick that now belongs to Philly. Do you think they're going to add another weapon? If so, where in the draft do you think that might happen? They've done it 2 consecutive years. Paris Campbell and Michael Pittman both in round 2. Campbell we think is good. Pittman we know is good. Where do you see them going with that position?
Man, you know what? If the right guy fell to them, I could definitely see them doing it, which will send Colts fandom into panic mode because
really?
I think a lot of them want wide receivers, but I think a lot of them also know they need to find that tackle of the future to fill in for Costanzo. And we talked about edge rush, they need to find an edge rusher. So if they use one of their first 2 picks on it, it would be, I'll say surprising, but again, if the right guy fell and if they fell in love with Rondale Moore and they were just we got to have that guy, let's get him in the offense, I could see that happening. If the completely unthinkable happened and Kyle Pitts slid to 10 and they were let's trade up and go get him, I think people would be stunned, but also excited. Those are the only kind of things I can think of. But no, honestly, the real answer I think is 4th round, 5th round wide receiver. I could see them definitely going there, or tight, like I said, a move tight end. But maybe it is another 2nd or 3rd round guy in that, Chris Ballard loves to acquire more picks. Maybe he trades back from 21. He doesn't like being behind the 8 ball in terms of total picks. Obviously the normal is 7. He's only got 6. So maybe he trades back from 21 and gets an extra 2 or 3. And then maybe you can use a pick on a wide receiver. And I definitely think they want more weapons. Frank Reich and the team owner, Jim Irsay, have said, we're seeing Kansas City, they have these difference makers in Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill. I think the Colts like some of their own receivers. I don't think any of them are Travis Kelce or Tyreek Hill. So I think they're still looking for that difference maker. And they could definitely go for one early in the draft. But my guess is still going to be to take care of their needs at tackle and edge.
Yeah, and that's a great point about trading back. I say this all the time. There's sweet spots for edge rushers and wide receivers in this draft. That's in the 2nd round. These edge rushers are fantastic. On my board, I have 17 of them in my top 85. There's so many of them, but it's weird because 2 of them are consensus top Ojulari and Kwity Paye, and then there's Jalen Phillips too. None of those guys are top 10 guys, and especially when you have 5 quarterbacks who are most likely going in the top 10, then you have to add all the skill positions, unless there's a Joey Bosa, Nick Young, or Nick Bosa, Chase Young in the draft. Edge is the position that gets forgotten about. So normally the top guys fall. Maybe they won't fall to 21, but if they do trade back because the top edge guys are not there, they now would have 2 2nd-round picks right in the sweet spot of edge and wide receiver.
I love that idea. Actually, I do. And, I think we're all kind of in mock draft mode right now. And I was going through one the other day and I was like, well, let's see what happens if I stand pat at 21. Now let's see what happens if I trade back. And I ended up collecting, and I think an extra mid-second in trading back. I essentially traded back 1 for 2 twos was what it ended up being, but I ended up getting Jalen Phillips at 36 and then Peyton Turner at like 51 or 54. I can't remember, but I was like, you know what? I kind of love the idea of doubling down at the edge. Like why hope one guy fixes the problem? Get 2 guys, get 2 young guys that you like, put them in there. And I still was able to draft a tackle with the other 2nd round pick I had, or 3rd round pick or something like that. I think either Jalen Mayfield or Liam Eichberg. I can't remember who it was, but anyway, I think you can trade back, and that's a great point. Like, I think the depth at tackle and edge this year is great, and I think if you trade back, you can get a couple of these guys.
Yeah, and I totally forgot about tackle class. Tackle might be the deepest class I've ever seen. Like, there's so many guys, but there are multiple guys at the top who are very, very good. Sewell's obviously top, and then Darrisaw later. But going deeper down the line, there's Tucker, who might play tackle, probably not. I think he's a guard, but there's so many of them. You mentioned Peyton Turner, who just tested very, very well. He tested off the charts at his pro day. And then who else? Oh, Phillips. Phillips is interesting because he has the injuries, but the production doesn't lie. And his production the last 2 years at Miami, especially this year, I think he led the nation in pressures. He was top 5 in pressures that I know. That's unbelievable. I don't think he falls 36.
Neither do I.
I really think he's the 3rd edge rusher taken, maybe even the 2nd if a team is really scared about Ojulari's lack of secondary pass rush moves. But I really think he's a 1st round guy. But stacking up on certain positions is something that a lot of teams do. I'm a Bengals fan, so they stacked up on linebackers last year. They drafted Logan Wilson the 3rd and then Akeem Davis-Gator in the 4th. They opened up day 3 taking a position they had taken 20 hours prior, and throughout the season they're like, well, we're learning together. And they also brought in Josh Bynes, a veteran, so that was a position they needed to fix. They did, and they brought in multiple guys in the draft, and like they're learning together. So that's kind of how a lot of teams do it.
I love the double down. I think some, like, if you look at some of the Colts drafts even too, a lot of times when they draft, 1 DB, they end up drafting 2. When they draft 1 linebacker, they end up drafting 2. You give the guy somebody to learn with. You also give yourself 2 possible solutions or to the question. So I like that idea. But before I just realizing now that you're a Bengals fan. So what are you hoping happens at 5?
Sewell. I'm all over Sewell. All over.
Okay.
I don't buy the whole, my whole thing, and not to shift this, but my whole thing is you draft the position of need that's hardest to fill. And when you look at offensive linemen and Trent Williams being $22 million a year, people have compared Sewell if like this guy can be Trent Williams. Well, if he's Trent Williams, why are you not drafting him? Because you can't get Trent Williams unless you draft him. So,
I agree.
Like, you can get now if Jamar Chase is Julio Jones, that's great. But the track record for wide receivers in the top 10 is not great. And that's not my main argument. I just think that the Bengals have 2 good ones. Now, I think they need another one. They need another pass catcher. I said that last year. I'm saying it this year. But I don't think they need Jamar Chase.
I totally agree with you, by the way. I think they need another pass catcher, but I might be higher on Tyler Boyd than most. I think he's really good. And Higgins is obviously great. So I kind of like where they're at with the receiver. Again, you could use somebody else, but let's not make that the number 1 need. You talked about receivers being available later. I get, listen, the Pitts hype has gotten to me. I'm not immune to it. And I would love to see Joe Burrow with Pitts, but if that doesn't happen, I think you're right. I think you take the offensive lineman and protect that kid and let him do his work.
Yeah. Well, the consensus right now is, well, the Bengals aren't taking Pitts. Like, pretty much the entire fan base knows it. That's just not a pick that they make. But I think it will be Sewell. I have a feeling that they're going to take Sewell. They always take linemen in the first. Like, it's a position that they've needed to fill. They haven't been able to fix it since Andrew Whitworth left, and I think that's where they're going to go. And they'll, Boyd was a 2nd round receiver. Higgins was a 2nd round receiver. They can find talent later on. Doesn't fit in the 1st round. And look at the last 1st round wide receiver they took, John Ross, and how that ended. But looking at the Colts roster, you mentioned interior line, and you mentioned left tackle. With a limited amount of picks, and you obviously mentioned the potential to double down on edge rusher, only 4 picks in the first 5 rounds, right?
Yeah. No third. So 4 picks in the first 5. Yep.
So how do you think that they'll kind of attack this draft? So let's start at 21. Where do you think their board might align at 21? And then we'll go from there.
Yeah, I mean, I think if a guy like Darisaw falls to them at 21, I think that's going to be the one that they go for. Or a guy like again, watching the tape of a guy like Tevin Jenkins is just a lot of fun because he likes being a real.
Awesome. He's awesome.
He's just a badass. I don't know if I can say this on the podcast, but he is just fun to watch. And watching him next to a guy like Quentin Nelson would be a lot of fun since he's also a badass. And so those guys playing next to each other. Now I know there's some questions about right tackle, left tackle, but the Colts are also open to experimenting a little bit with moving Braden Smith to the left and maybe again, if Tevin Jenkins is only a right, then maybe they can move Braden over to the left. So they've been very committed to this stance of best 5 linemen. That's why even Tucker, I think they would be open to if he fell. I know a lot of people really like him. I think they could try him at tackle in camp, say, okay, it doesn't work. And then are they willing to move Quentin Nelson out the left tackle? They've been talking about that a little bit. I think that's the least desirable outcome. So maybe taking Tucker is not the best choice, but if he can play tackle, great. Like that guy is supremely talented. I think he's got some arm length issues maybe. So maybe playing tackle is not the best idea, but again, I think they're going to take the most talented player they can get. And I think it's going to be at offensive line would be my guess. But again, I could also see edge. For me, it's at 21, it's O-line and edge are like 1A, 1B. And then if anything else happens, I'll be surprised. Again, I could see maybe receiver. I can't really say. It's kind of a corner. Actually, a corner would be, again, because you only have Xavier Rhodes for one more year. Rock has kind of been up and down. So maybe, I guess corner would be the dark horse pick. But again, I'm going, if Darisaw, Jenkins, Tucker, one of those guys falls to 21, that's probably where I'm going.
Yeah, so Tucker did measure in below the 33-inch arm length threshold. Right. That's kind of like, and Sewell barely made it. I'm like, I don't care. Like Sewell, yeah. I get it for Tucker because he actually was a guard. Like he played guard. He was the highest rated guard in the Pac-12 in 2019. Then replaced Austin Jackson at left tackle and was the highest graded offensive lineman in the Pac-12 again. So teams are going to love that. He tested very well. I think he's arguably a top 15 guy. But for the Colts, maybe moving Nelson to left tackle, not the best scenario. I've talked to people, they said he'd be a top 5 left tackle in the league if he played there. And it's very hard to disagree. But if they took Tevin Jenkins, who I think will be there at 21, and if they don't, I think Cleveland's going to be all over that. But if they take Tevin Jenkins and pair him with Nelson, if you're Jonathan Taylor,
what could you ask for? I mean, what else more?
He might be the most excited American to go to work in the country.
It's a perfect fit. I mean, honestly, he fits like, and again, the Colts believe in building in the trenches. Their offensive, defensive line first. You saw with the way they spent their first round pick last year by trading for DeForest Buckner, a defensive tackle. Not a lot of things, not what a lot of teams would do, honestly. And he's an incredible 3 technique. But yeah, and we saw Chris Ballard and one of his most controversial picks at the time was trading back from 3 and taking Quentin Nelson at 6. That has worked out incredibly well. Like he's going to pick in the trenches, and when he does, he's usually pretty good at it. And so I think that, again, Jenkins is a guy that I would love to see there. Darisaw, I'm not as big a fan of Darisaw as like some others, but I could also, again, I think he fits well with the Colts. And I think a lot of times when you're playing on a good offensive line, that 5th piece doesn't necessarily have to be incredible. Like sometimes you can kind of be the best sum of all the parts, I suppose, if that makes any sense. Like he can play next to Quentin Nelson and Ryan Kelly and Mark Kowinski and Braden Smith, 4 really good pieces, and just kind of blend right in and fit. Like you don't have to get a star there. So I think anybody they plug in can be fine, but obviously you get a guy like Tevin Jenkins, and the run lanes on the left side will be devastating.
Yeah, and for the people at home who don't know who Tevin Jenkins is, Oklahoma State probably, like besides Sewell, the meanest, nastiest run blocker in the draft. And also you mentioned the versatility for Tucker. Tevin Jenkins actually has played every offensive line position other than center. So he's another guy who's versatile. And again, teams are going to love that, especially with all the injuries that happen on the offensive line. And the Colts have that ability to move guys around. You mentioned Braden Smith potentially moving to left tackle. So what I'm kind of hearing from you is they might just go with the best lineman available. Maybe not take a guard, but take the best guy available regardless of left tackle or right tackle because they have availability to move it around.
I think that's what they think. I do. I really do. I think they say they're going to take the best offensive lineman, not a guy who has to play left tackle or has to play guard or something like that. They've been pretty conscious of saying all offseason long, let's get the best 5 offensive linemen available. Now it's a lot. I mean, like Quentin Nelson, he could very well be that good at left tackle. It's just, for me, I don't like taking that risk because he might just be a generational guard. He's a 3-time All-Pro in his first 3 years. So, I mean, he's on the track to the Hall of Fame at that spot. I don't want to take that. Like, he might just keep doing that at left tackle, but I don't want to take the risk. I'm happy with what he's doing at guard. Braden Smith is a guy that they drafted as a guard out of Auburn. And then we're kind of surprised to find he could play right tackle. And that's great. He's been an incredibly good right tackle. He's developed. He's one of the best young tackles in the league. So my question is, okay, you didn't know he was going to play tackle. Now he's playing a great right tackle. Now you're going to move him to left. Are you okay with that? Like, I think he might have the versatility to do it. So I think that option is better than the Quentin Nelson moving out to left tackle option. So I think you're right. I think it's take the best lineman available. The Tucker pick would be fascinating to see how that ends up playing out then between Quentin and Braden. But most of the best top linemen, I think, are tackles outside of Tucker. Right. So I think that would be how they play it at 21. If not, like we talked about at the beginning, trading back.
Right. Then, going down the line is Trey Smith, Wyatt Davis. But Tucker's the best, but he played tackle last year and is listed as a guard. But little off topic real quick. When you saw Joe Thuney's contract, what was it? 5 years, 120, 160, something like that. He got like 15 a year. As a Colts fan with Quentin Nelson coming up in 2 years, does that worry you at all? Because he's gonna get a lot more than that. He has to.
Oh yeah, he's gonna get $20 million a year. He's gonna be the first guard to do it. I think. I honestly do. I mean,
maybe the only guard ever.
It's gonna be. I think it's gonna be monstrous. Like he's gonna get paid like a left tackle. And again, like the Colts have talked about him like they talk about him like a wide receiver running back. Like he's a weapon for them. Like they use him. That's the way they use him. And they run behind. If they're not running behind him, they're pulling him and running behind him. Like that's if they're running right, he's going with them. Like he's so versatile. He's so great there. No, I think the Colts are. I don't want to say they're worried, but again, like if people are wondering why they didn't spend a ton of money now, right. Part of the reason why is because you have a $20 million guard coming up. And you probably have a $17 to $18 million tackle in Braden Smith. Like, I know people don't think of him as one of the best tackles in football, but like he's going to get to free agency at 26. That's 20 great young right tackles hitting free agency at 26 are going to get super paid. So he's going to command quite a bit. I don't know if he gets the open market because I think they're going to pay him before that. But his agent's going to say, well, if we got to the market, we'd be making $17 or $18 million a year. So they're going to commit close to $40 million just between those two guys. And then you've got to mention Darius Leonard, who like most people don't pay inside linebackers $16, $17 million a year. He's going to get paid that because he's one of the best in the league at that. So suddenly all this cap space is going to get taken up by these premier players that they drafted in 2018, which will go down as one of the better drafts maybe ever at this point.
Right. Exactly. I mean, Saints had one in 2017 where they drafted, I forgot that Trey Hendrickson was part of that draft.
I know. Lattimore and
he was their fifth round pick, and then Colts had that in 2018. A bunch of guys who, I look at it as they do get a second contract, and they have three guys who will. So, who was their first round pick that year?
That was Quinn.
Oh, it was Quinn. That's right. Okay, so like three guys who are easily going to get second contracts above average market value, and that's crazy. And obviously Leonard looks like the odd man out, but it seems like he will re-sign or get a lot of money somewhere if he doesn't. Yeah. But yeah, and then that's a good point about keeping the cap space because you have to keep your in-house guys if you're going to make a run, and these guys are as good as anyone in the league. But right. Going back to draft, so before I let you go, and I love talking about the Colts. They're like my second favorite team now because of Carson Wentz. Like I can't lie. I will be rooting for them. And I'm glad that the Bengals played them in Indy. I was at that game. Tough ending. But I'm glad.
That was weird start to that game. I did not expect that.
Man, it was it was a lot of fun. And I was actually with Harris and you interviewed him. I was with him in Indianapolis. We took a trip, and he was like, "Why aren't you talking trash to the Colts fans? We're up 21-0." I'm like, "I've been a Bengals fan for 13 years. This game is not over." And so, but I'm glad that they played him this year or last year because I can't root against Carson Wentz, even though they did play Carson Wentz already last year. But anyways, so 21, I'm gonna name you a few guys who are there, and you're gonna tell me if you're the Ursays, you're Frank Reich. Who are you taking? So Greg Newsome is there, and we haven't talked with him because we did mention the cornerback market.
Yeah.
This is a Greg Newsome fan right here. You're looking at arguably the biggest Greg Newsome fan there is. So he is there. The top three corners are all gone. Asante Samuel's there. For receivers, Bateman is there. Marshall's there. Moore is there. And then for the tackles, Darrisaw's not there. I think he's a top 15 guy. Jenkins is there. Raddens is there. And then Jalen Mayfield is there as well.
Okay, so yeah, for me, it's coming down to Jenkins and Newsome. And Newsome, I think you're going to find that Chris Ballard be a similar fan as you. He loves his big corners.
Right.
And at 6'1", that fits the profile, man. He loves that. I think the arms are, I have to look at the numbers again, but I think he's super long arms, like just an athletic kid. Like Northwestern is a place that Chris Ballard, I was just doing a big draft resume. Chris Ballard loves to draft out of the Big Ten. So Northwestern fits. Like he does a lot of the things that he fits a lot of the profile of what Chris Ballard would do. That said, as much as I think that would make a lot of sense for the Colts, if Tevin Jenkins is there, I think you probably got to pull the trigger. Again, I think what we've talked about over and over again, the depth of and you mentioned the positions, the depth of tackle, of edge, of corner, and some maybe not as deep as the other ones, but of those positions, trading back makes a lot of sense at this point. You just named a bunch of guys. I'm like, oh yeah, how about I trade back to 26, pick up that 3rd round pick that I gave up in the Carson Wentz deal, and we're good to go. But if you're making me pick here at this spot, I'll take Jenkins and I'll feel really good about it.
So you also kind of lean towards trading down, not anything crazy, not like a Seattle type move, but kind of getting that 3rd round pick. That's a good point for the, getting that Carson Wentz trade back, because if Mayfield and Jenkins are there, it might be worth taking the risk to move down 5 spots and hope that. Well, I think Jenkins would go because I really think Cleveland's gonna be all over that. That's a position that I mocked Jenkins to a couple times to Cleveland before he was even a consensus 1st round guy. So I feel pretty proud about that, not gonna lie. But yeah, I know he's great, and I like Mayfield a lot. He only has 1 year under his belt, which might turn some teams off, but he's very, very raw, very, very talented. I think he's also a 1st round guy too. And then Dylan Raddens is kind of the odd man out. He might be a 2nd round guy, kind of like the top of the 2nd tier. Doesn't really have 1st round tape, but is young and he wins a lot. Like he's won a lot. But like I think he's a good culture fit for a team like the Colts to kind of come in there and he's a winner and he's won a lot and has that experience there. But
so you're not an Eichenberg guy? I haven't heard that name yet. Around Indiana here, that's people will be mad at you.
I mean, he's in my top 10.
Okay.
But no, like a couple people I've talked to don't like him. I like him a bit more. I think he's gonna be good. Just he's more in the Raddens. I'm low on Alex Leatherwood. I think he's athletic, he's big, but most of these guys are gonna play guard year 1. I don't think he will. I think he's too big. So that's a turn off. So he might have to tackle year 1, which we saw some of these tackles other than the rookies this year. We saw these tackles. We saw how Andrew Thomas looked, and he dominated the SEC for years, and we saw what he did in the NFC East. So I don't know if Leatherwood is going to play guard year 1. I think he's too big. So we saw how some of these tackles played, like in the 2nd round, 3rd round guys who got a chance to play, and I think that's kind of going to be him. But he has potential. But I think 21, 22, if they would trade down 26, great spot for offensive tackle.
I think 26 is the Jets. Is that right? 26?
It might be.
That's a team that Chris Ballard has traded with 3 times, I think, during his career. Rex Hogan used to be his right-hand man. He's there in New York. You try to line up the spots where a trade back might happen or where there's been some talk ahead of the draft. Like trading back to 26 might be something the Colts could do. Still get a tackle that they like, maybe not Tevin Jenkins, but a tackle that they like, collect that extra pick and move on. But again, if again, I don't know Chris Ballard's thoughts on this, but if he loves Tevin Jenkins and he's there at 21, might just pounce, just do it, make the pick and feel good about it.
Yeah, and that's something that I feel like that they would be open to doing. Just get your guy. No need to risk him not being there. If they do like multiple guys, then they kind of warrant a trade back. But if they like one guy, similar to Atlanta, if Atlanta loves Kyle Pitts, you have to take him. This is a guy who could change your offense, and just take him. And just teams. I like when teams get their guy, whether it's coaches, whether it's players. Get your guy. No need to do anything fancy. But Jim,
that's why I grew up in Chicago. Okay. So I've always been a Bear fan, and I remember the Mitch Trubisky trade, which listen,
he's their guy.
The Mitch Trubisky pick was a horrible pick. The analysis was wrong. They did everything wrong.
Oh yeah.
I had no problem with the trade. I had zero problem with trading up from 3 to 2 to get a guy. If that's your guy, go get your guy. I always believed it. I don't care what the price is. If you have a guy you think is the guy, go do it. And if the 49ers, if you even get a whiff of saying, hey, somebody's coming up to trade ahead of you to draft Mitch Trubisky, and you're saying that's my guy, well, okay, go get him. So I didn't have a problem with the trade. It was just the passing on Patrick Mahomes to Deshaun Watson that I had a problem with.
Right. I don't think Mahomes really was ever going to go in the top 5. Watson should have. Watson arguably should have been the number 1 overall pick to Cleveland. But the Mahomes missed scouting. I never understood it. Most people thought he was going to be really good. I did too. That was just a whiff on all these teams. Like, how do you let him fall that far? It just a horrible misscouting. And I know this is going super long, but one of the things the reason why Zach Wilson might be so touted is because people are now scared of the
afraid of missing
Mahomes. They're like, okay, we had this guy who is getting Mahomes, Rodgers comes. He's not going to be that guy, but he could be. Like, what if he is?
Yeah, exactly. What you can't pass on the potential now. You see the arm strength, you see the mobility, you see all the tools. You're like, well, we can't pass. You might be raw, but why not? Like, you know what? I like Wilson. I like if you're the Jets, why not? Like, go for it. Like, plug in a guy like that and feel good about it. I don't know. Well, I'm fascinated to see, like, at 3. I know you seem like you're a huge draft guy. I'm fascinated to see if the smokescreen stuff, is it Mac Jones at 3 or is it not? And the Falcons, is it going to be 4 quarterbacks in a row? Are the Falcons going to pick one or not? Like, the first picks 3 and 4, I am just like, I can't wait for it.
Yeah. And first time ever, it'd be quarterback's first 4 picks, I believe. And that'd be crazy. And then we'll see where Fields goes, because he seems like the odd man out there. I don't think he should be. I think he's quarterback too, man. I think.
Hannah Wilson. Okay. Yeah. I like it.
I was a Zach Wilson guy before a lot of people. I was like, I watched every single one of his games live this year because I love this guy. He was good last year and took a huge step the first couple of games, and then they started televising his games, and I was like, yes, this guy, he's finally breaking out of it. And then he turned into a top 5 prospect. I'm like, where did this come from? This guy who had a 55% completion percentage against Coastal Carolina. Where did this come from? But like, Justin Fields sitting here, threw 6 touchdowns against Clemson.
I know.
What are we doing here?
I know. He came back and had that incredible guy, because I watched him I watched Fields against Indiana, and I was like, I don't see it. I don't see what everybody's talking about. And then you watch him in the national championship game, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I got it. That's what people are talking about.
6 touchdowns with a broken rib.
Yeah, but, incredible.
Multiple broken ribs. But anyways, Jim, man, that was awesome. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. That was a blast.
Yeah, always good talking to a fellow Tiger. But make sure to follow Jim on Twitter at Jim Ayello. Thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for watching this episode of 32 Teams in 32 Days, and I'll catch you in the next one.